You're listening to Dark Rain Chronicles. The rain hides many things, but it also remembers. Secrets washed away, voices swallowed by the storm. These are the stories it brings back, and tonight, you will hear them. Who could predict that a simple rectangle of glass set into a wall might dismantle a life? When Alara first acquired the house, she'd cherished the living room's immense window, a veritable wall of light. Daylight flooded through it, illuminating dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. It offered a panoramic stage of the street, an open invitation for neighbors passing glances. It felt like transparency, a welcoming embrace. Now, that same glassy expanse radiates only menace. Alara recalls the precise evening its nature shifted. Ritualistically drawing the heavy curtains before bed, she reached for the window's closure, a small brass crescent at the bottom sill, usually flicked shut with absent-minded ease. That night, however, long after the latch clicked home, she jolted awake near 3 in the morning. A violent banging echoed from the living room, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She recognized the sound, a window pane being thrashed by gales. Yet the forecast had promised only stillness. Slipping out of bed, she crept towards the noise. The curtains billowed softly. The window itself gaped open, rhythmically slamming against its wooden frame. She flicked the light switch. Outside, absolute darkness pressed against the glass. Not a leaf stirred. The skeletal branches of the front yard maple stood utterly motionless. Closer now, she inspected the latch. It remained firmly in the locked position, a brass sentinel defying the obvious reality of the open window. A frown creased her brow. She pulled the window fully closed, pushed the crescent latch firmly until it bit, then tested it, tugging sharply twice. Immovable. Annoyance eclipsing fear, she returned to her room, attributing it to her own carelessness, a failure to secure it properly. The following night repeated the ritual. Weather checked, calm. Window locked, double-checked with a forceful tug. Solid. Later, wrenched from profound sleep by that same dull, percussive battery, her eyes flew open. A cold dread pooled in her stomach, limbs tingling with sudden alertness. Her phone screen glowed. 2:30 a.m. Barefoot on the cool floorboards, she stole into the living room once more. Open, curtains swaying. The night beyond, a placid tableau. Yet the window hammered its relentless tattoo against the frame. Cursing under her breath, she switched on a lamp, its warm glow pushing back the shadows, but not the unease. She closed the window, tested the stubborn latch again, this time examining its brass surface, the surrounding wood, seeking any crack, any flaw. Worn, certainly. The house had seen decades, but seemingly intact. She yanked with considerable force. It held fast. Shaking her head, she retreated, clinging to the explanation of faulty mechanics, an old house settling its bones. Daylight brought investigation. Alara knelt before the window, scrutinizing the latch mechanism, searching for gaps, for any plausible reason it might slip. The metal gleamed dully, worn smooth in places but functional. She tightened the screws securing it to the sash, applied a whisper of lubricant. Then, a series of tests. Lock, unlock, pull. Lock, unlock, pull. The window remained steadfastly shut. Satisfied for the moment, she waited. As dusk bled into night, she closed the window as usual. Then, impulsively, she dragged a small armchair across the room, positioning it directly opposite the glass pane. She sat in the enveloping darkness, a silent sentinel, determined to witness its unbidden movement. An hour crawled by. Boredom warred with a low thrum of anxiety. The house hummed with only the refrigerator's monotonous drone. Her back protested the stillness. Rising to stretch, the silence remained unbroken. A creeping disquiet settled over her, a feeling she consciously pushed aside. Nothing. Perhaps tightening the screws had worked. She finally conceded defeat and went to bed. It hadn't worked. Around 3, the familiar banging tore through the quiet, jerking her awake with brutal insistence. A chill, sharp and invasive, traced patterns on her arms. Her heart rate spiked. "What in God's name?" she muttered, throwing back the covers and striding towards the living room. Predictably, the window stood wide open, glass rattling with each impact against the frame. The overhead light flickered on, revealing the room's mundane order, disrupted only by the swaying curtains. She approached, bracing for a phantom gust, but the air hung heavy and still. No draft caressed her skin. The discrepancy grated against logic. Such force required wind. Her hand trembled slightly as she grasped the window's edge, the glass cool beneath her palm. She slammed it shut. At that exact moment, a faint scraping sound whispered from behind her. Elara spun, muscles coiled, eyes darting. Only the familiar shapes of the couch, the coffee table, the inert television greeted her. She scanned the room, searching the shadows, every nerve alight. Stillness. She stood frozen for minutes, breath coming fast, listening to the profound, almost watchful silence of the house. She resolved to remain in the living room. Switching on the television, keeping the volume low, she settled onto the couch, eyes fixed on the window. The night offered no further disturbances. When dawn's gray light eventually filtered through the glass, diluting the shadows, her anxiety lessened marginally. She checked the latch again, still locked. And then, the chilling realization struck. The latch was always locked when she found the window open. This wasn't merely a worn mechanism slipping. This defied simple physics. A lump formed in her throat. Resolutely, she shoved aside thoughts of the uncanny, blaming exhaustion, overlooking some obvious mechanical quirk. Perhaps, she reasoned, the latch snapped back into place. After the window flew open. Not being mechanically inclined, she couldn't be certain if such a thing was even possible. The subsequent nights became a torturous cycle. Lock the window, wake to the banging hours later, find the window open, find the latch inexplicably locked. Frustration curdled into a prickling fear she refused to name. She contacted a local handyman, a Mr. Davies, who arrived one afternoon, radiating brisk competence. He fiddled, tested, replaced a small, worn component within the latch assembly, and pronounced it sound. No other issues apparent. A fragile bubble of relief inflated within her. Perhaps that was it. It wasn't. That very night, the banging commenced around 2. By now, waking was instantaneous, her body primed. A cold sweat beaded on her forehead, her chest constricted. She marched to the living room, resolve hardening her steps, and grasped the window sash. As she pushed it closed, her gaze snagged on the reflection in the darkening pane. A presence, a shadowy form standing directly behind her. She froze, immobility born of sheer terror. Goose flesh erupted across her skin. Her scalp prickled. Her heart seized, then hammered violently, a deafening drumbeat in the sudden silence. She didn't dare breathe, staring transfixed at the reflection. A tall, indistinct silhouette, featureless, a void carved out of the reflected room. With a strangled cry, she whirled, stumbling slightly. Nothing. Just the empty space, the familiar furniture mocking her panic. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Nausea surged. Impossible, she whispered, the word flimsy against the stark certainty of what she'd glimpsed. Sleep became a fugitive state, pursued only with every light blazing. The house, once a sanctuary, now seemed alive with menacing creaks and groans. Did she truly see it? A trick of light, her own shadow distorted. Yet the image felt distinct, separate, positioned undeniably behind her. The thought of calling Liam, her closest friend, flickered, but late-night calls about spectral figure felt mortifyingly irrational. She tried calming herself with music, lying rigid in bed, listening, until sheer exhaustion dragged her into a shallow, troubled doze. Waking felt like surfacing from murky depths, tired and frayed. Boarding up the window seemed drastic, an admission of defeat. Instead, she drove to the hardware store, selecting the most formidable lock she could find, a heavy-duty slide bolt, along with new, thick weather stripping. An hour was spent installing them, meticulously ensuring a tight seal. She tested the window repeatedly, unyielding. As a final, almost desperate measure, she applied strips of thick duct tape along the edges where sash met frame. An ugly solution, but aesthetics were irrelevant now. She craved only nocturnal peace. That evening, preparing dinner, attempting distraction by a television, the living room felt charged, hostile. Every glance towards the taped, fortified window conjured the memory of that reflected darkness. Her shoulders ached with tension. Her stomach churned. Imagination, she told herself fiercely. An artifact of sleep deprivation, the mind playing tricks. But the conviction wavered. Midnight passed. She retreated to bed, drifting off near 1. Just past 2, a ringing silence woke her, her own pulse thudding in her ears. Then, faint but distinct, tapping. She sat bolt upright, straining to hear. Silence descended again. Flicking on the bedside lamp banished the darkness, but not the tension. Her mouth was dessert dry. She forced slow, deliberate breaths. Waited. Nothing. Had she dreamt it? Then, a single, resonant thud from the living room. Adrenaline surged, a primal fight-or-flight response flooding her system. Hands clammy, legs unsteady, she slid from bed, inexplicably grabbing a heavy flashlight before creeping down the hall. Peeking around the door frame, she saw the curtains stir, a subtle ripple in the still air. Heart pounding against her ribs, she flipped the main light switch. The window yawned partially open. One strip of duct tape hung loose, torn raggedly. The flashlight nearly slipped from her grasp. Striding forward, she slammed the window shut, pushing against it, testing its resistance. Solid. No splintered wood. No sign of forced entry. And then, reflected in the glass, she saw it again. The tenebrous shape hovering just behind her reflection. Her pulse became a frantic flutter. She spun, flashlight beams slicing through the air, illuminating only empty space. Couch, table, chairs, bathed in the ordinary electric light. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. Taking several shaky steps back from the window, she fought for breath. Her mind raced, a frantic scramble for explanation that yielded nothing. Tingling started in her fingertips. Sweat broke out anew on her forehead. Her entire being felt hyper-alert, poised for an invisible assault. Methodically, forcing herself through the fear, she searched every corner of the living room, peered under furniture, behind curtains, even checked the small coat closet near the entrance. Nothing. No one. Only Alara, alone in her house. For the remainder of that night, she sat rigidly on the couch, every light burning, her gaze locked on the window. The house settled into its nocturnal symphony, floorboards groaning, the distant hum of unseen machinery, the clock's relentless tick. Her eyelids grew heavy, weighted with exhaustion, but sleep remained elusive, her brain refusing to switch off. Around 5, just as she began to succumb, a faint rustling sound nearby jolted her fully awake, heart instantly galloping. The window remained shut, the new bolt holding, the tape still torn on one side, but the curtains trembled. She crept closer, pressing her ear to the cold glass, half expecting a whisper. Only the ragged sound of her own breathing answered. Days bled into a pattern of dread. Each time she secured the window, night brought its inevitable violation. The banging became erratic, sometimes a soft, hesitant knock, other times a violent, frenzied rattling, as if something desperately sought entry or exit. Every occurrence sent her searching for logic, pressure differentials, structural flaws. Yet the stillness outside persisted, mocking her rationalizations. And the figure in the reflection, she saw it 3 more times, each glimpse sending shards of ice through her veins, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. Each time, it vanished the instant she turned. The living room became hostile territory. Television was watched in the bedroom, books read at the kitchen table. She ceased drawing the curtains fully open during the day. The mere sight of the vast, silent pain evoked a visceral unease. A couple of nights she fled to the anonymity of a motel, craving respite, but abandoning her home felt like surrender. It was her space, invaded. Finally, she asked Liam over, masking her terror behind a casual complaint about a stubborn window. He knew more about houses than she did. Sitting in the tense atmosphere of the living room, she detailed the latch issue, omitting the spectral observer. Together they tested the window, the locks. Liam suggested a secondary, stronger lock, perhaps the sliding bolt she'd already installed, positioned higher up. He helped her check its installation, joking that her house was just trying to breathe. Alara forced a hollow laugh, her palms slick with sweat. After Liam departed, she remained, a solitary vigil in the gathering dark. Lights off, she watched the window. Midnight chimed. 1 o'clock. A fragile hope flickered. Perhaps the reinforced security would finally hold. But shortly after 2, the banging returned, louder this time, imbued with a terrifying urgency. Her heart leapt into her throat. Fumbling for the lamp, she flooded the room with light. The window gaped open. Both locks, the original latch and the heavy bolt, were undone. The bolt slid back smoothly in its track. Disbelief warred with rising panic. Her muscles locked, her breathing grew shallow. Then, her gaze drifted to the reflective surface. The shape was there again, behind her reflection, but closer now, impossibly close, as if leaning over her shoulder. A strangled gasp escaped her. She spun around. Emptiness. The living room remained vacant, yet the feeling of presence was overwhelming, palpable, clinging to the air like static. She slammed the window shut, her hands shaking so violently she could barely manipulate the locks. She secured the bolt, double-checked the latch, then scrambled backwards, away from the glass. Lightheadedness washed over her. The banging had ceased, but the chilling certainty of being watched, of not being alone, remained. Heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, she retreated to the bedroom, flicking on every light switch as she went. She closed the door, wedged a chair beneath the knob. Pacing the confines of the room, she fought to regulate her breathing, the tingling dread now a full-body hum. Skin clammy, stomach churning. She was utterly awake, yet drowning in exhaustion. "Stay calm," she commanded herself. But her imagination conjured the dark form lingering by the window, patient, waiting. And that is Alara's present state, the narrative unresolved. The window continues its nightly rebellion. The banging persists. The reflection still harbors that tenebrous shape when caught at the periphery. She is trapped in a cycle of fear and sleeplessness, nerves stretched taut. Every logical solution exhausted, every mundane explanation debunked. Neighbors remain undisturbed. The house itself offers no clues beyond its rogue window. Leaving feels like defeat, yet staying shreds her sanity night by night. Each evening, she braces for the inevitable thud, the prelude to another encounter. Her muscles tense preemptively. Her heart accelerates, the slightest sound magnified. She clings to the hope of a simple answer, while the evidence of her senses screams otherwise. It isn't normal. It isn't stopping. That beautiful, light-giving window is now a source of profound dread, a portal she cannot seal. Nightly, she confronts the banging. Nightly, she glimpses the darkness coalescing behind her in the glass. Nightly, she locks the window, knowing it will open again, watched by something she cannot see, but increasingly feels. Her story unfolds not in recollection, but in real-time terror, trapped with an inexplicable presence, afraid to turn her back for too long. It is real, she knows with chilling certainty, and it shows no sign of ever letting her go. Last night, ice bloomed in my veins. A whisper of stressed wood from beyond my bedroom door, soft, yet insistent, arrested my breath. My heart, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, threatened to shatter bone. Solitude was absolute. The house sealed tight, every window latched, each door bolted against the encroaching dark. Yet, the sound persisted, a slow, measured cadence echoing down the narrow hall, footfalls drawing inexorably closer. This confession, this unburdening, feels necessary now. The undeniable wrongness clinging to the second floor of my new dwelling can no longer be ignored. Just weeks ago, I settled into this compact townhouse, nestled within a sedate neighborhood populated mostly by the elderly. Its proximity to work and agreeable rent made it seem ideal. The structure is slender. A constricted living space flows into a modest kitchen, beside which a staircase ascends to the upper level's 2 bedrooms. Perfect, I thought, for a man of few possessions. The smaller room was destined for boxes, perhaps a desk. A sense of accomplishment warmed me. my own space. The initial days unfolded uneventfully. Boxes yielded their contents. Furniture found its place. Familiar pictures graced the walls. Daylight held no terrors. The upstairs corridor, a brief channel perhaps 10 feet long, connects the stair landing to my primary bedroom door. To the left, a bathroom. Opposite, the spare room. Utterly normal. I paced it then, from the final stair tread to my threshold. 5 steps, give or take that initial half stride from the landing. Cozy was the word that came to mind. Roughly a week into my tenancy, the nights began to subtly distort. Venturing into the darkness towards the bathroom, I'd perceive a discrepancy. More steps required than memory dictated. Fatigue, I rationalized. But the following night brought recurrence, accompanied by an unsettling chill tracing my spine. The air itself feeling thick, imbued with a faint, almost subaudible vibration underfoot. Retreating to my bedroom, the lock clicking shut felt less like security, more like denial. An attempt to dismiss the burgeoning unease. It must have been the 8th or 9th night when I resolved to quantify this sensation. Waiting until the deep quiet of 11, I extinguished every upstairs light. Positioned at the stairhead, I counted aloud, voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My hand reached, expecting the familiar cool brass of the doorknob. Empty air met my grasp. My breathing hitched, quickening despite my efforts at control. 2 more hesitant steps forward, and then my fingertips brushed metal. I pushed through, securing the door behind me. 5 steps in daylight, 7 in darkness. The moment crystallized. This was no figment. My mornings developed a ritual, pacing the hallway, counting steps under the benign gaze of the sun. Always 5. The distance remained immutable, the geography fixed. Bathroom door, spare room door, my own. All precisely where they belonged. Yet, with the descent of night, some fundamental property of the space warped. The corridor elongated. 7 steps some nights, 8 on others. Never exceeding 8, but 8 was profoundly disquieting. I noticed, too, a subtle migration of the doors themselves. Sometimes the bathroom seemed nearer the stairs, other times a drift further down the passage. An experiment, banish the dark with artificial light. One Friday, returning late, I illuminated the entire upper floor, hallway ceiling fixture, lamps in both bedrooms. Under the stark glare, normalcy reigned. 5 steps to my door. A nervous laugh escaped me. I'd been spooking myself. Switching off the spare room and hallway lights, I stepped back out to test the darkness. Instantly, that oppressive density returned. Blind, I felt. The corridor distended before me. My mouth turned arid, a knot tightening in my gut. Reaching out, my fingers grazed the wallpaper, the familiar floral pattern, yet strangely, unexpectedly warm to the touch. I snatched my hand back, walked forward, 6 steps this time. I scrambled into my room, lock clicking home. The subsequent nights became an exercise in avoidance. I confined myself to my bedroom after dusk, emerging only out of stark necessity. A trip to the bathroom required flipping every switch, bathing the passage in light. This usually restored the 5-step count. But the moment the lights died, I sensed the spatial shift anew. Stress, imagination. The explanations grew flimsy, finally collapsing entirely when I first heard the footsteps behind me. It began perhaps 3 days ago. Halfway to my bedroom, whispering the count, a floorboard groaned behind me. My pulse leaped. I whirled, phone flashlight slicing the dark. Nothing. The hallway stretched empty, terminating in the closed door of the spare room and the stairwell beyond. A second creak, closer. I spun again, beam dancing frantically. Still emptiness. But the air felt electric, goose flesh prickling my arms, my own ragged breath loud in my ears. My hand closed on my doorknob, yanking the door open. I slammed it shut, leaning heavily against the wood, chest constricting, unable to draw a full breath. I remember sinking to the floor, eyes fixed on the gap beneath the door, utterly convinced something waited just beyond. Sleep offered little refuge that night. Each time my eyes closed, the faint creaking resumed, small, furtive steps pacing the hallway. Earplugs muffled the sound. A blanket pulled over my head created a fragile barrier. Fitful sleep came eventually. Morning revealed the familiar, mundane corridor. 5 steps. Stable floorboards. No lingering charge in the air. Anxiety and exhaustion, I told myself, clinging to rationality. But the dread lingered, a cold residue throughout the day. That evening, another test. Upstairs, lights off, phone beam directed downwards. I stood at the landing. Calm, I told myself. The corridor felt immediately, palpably longer. I counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It simply continued. I swept the light ahead. My bedroom door was visible but distant, recessed. The spare room door was now behind me, on my left. An impossibility, as it should be to my right when facing my bedroom. Nausea churned. A quick glance right revealed not the expected bathroom door, but only more indeterminate hallway stretching into shadow. My pulse hammered. Another step forward. A floorboard complained behind me. I whipped around, light stabbing the void. Empty. My throat tightened. 3 more steps. Light fixed ahead. 9 paces finally brought me to my door. I plunged inside, locked it, and collapsed onto the edge of the bed, hands trembling uncontrollably. The remainder of that night was spent cocooned in my room. Mindless phone videos provided a temporary dam against the encroaching fear until sleep claimed me intermittently. Each awakening was punctuated by listening, straining for sounds beyond the door. Faint creaks, soft tapping noises. They came several times. I remained burrowed under the covers, refusing to investigate, forcing my thoughts elsewhere. Morning brought thoughts of escape, fleeing this house, but the investment, the disruption. Calling an old friend proved futile. Explaining felt absurd. I mumbled about poor sleep, creaky floors, odd drafts. He offered practical, mundane advice. Insulation, floorboard repairs. I feigned agreement and ended the call, feeling more isolated than before. Most of the day was spent downstairs, pacing, trying to muster the courage for a daylight inspection. Around noon, I ascended, walked the corridor. 5 steps. Unremarkable. I opened the spare room door. Bare walls, stacked boxes. Opened the bathroom. Sink, tub, normalcy. I pressed on the floorboards. They yielded slightly, creaking innocuously. The notion of a hotel room flickered, but pride, a stubborn refusal to be intimidated by empty space, kept me here. Flawed reasoning in retrospect. As dusk bled into evening, the familiar dread returned, clammy palms and an urgent desire to retreat behind my locked door. Around 8, I saturated the downstairs with light, kitchen and living room blazing. I assembled a sandwich, consumed it without tasting, television flickering ignored in the periphery. My gaze kept drifting towards the staircase. By 10, I conceded defeat and headed for bed. Downstairs, lights extinguished, front door secured. I climbed the stairs. The unease intensified the moment I reached the landing. The hallway appeared unchanged, yet my entire body tensed. 5 swift steps brought me to my bedroom. I locked the door, showered quickly in the small ensuite, and crawled into bed, switching off the light, praying for swift oblivion. Midnight, or perhaps later. The need for the main bathroom became undeniable. I fought it, lying rigid for what felt like an hour, but the physical urge became unbearable. Reluctantly, I rose and opened my bedroom door. The hallway was a pit of blackness. My fingers found the light switch. Click. Nothing. My breath hitched. Click, 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 futilely flipping the switch. Dead bulb. Power issue. My phone lay on the nightstand, its flashlight unavailable. I stepped out regardless. My vision slowly adapted, revealing faint outlines of walls steeped in shadow. I moved cautiously, counting mentally. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then, stillness. The floor groaned behind me. A sharp turn revealed only deeper darkness. Stay calm, I hissed inwardly. Deep breath. Forward again. 5, 6. Another creak, closer this time. A glance over my shoulder. Nothing. My heart hammered, a painful thudding in my ears. My pace quickened, stumbling slightly in my haste to locate the bathroom door. It wasn't there. My searching hand swept across smooth wall, finding no frame, no interruption. Panic flared. I traced the surface, desperate for the feel of a doorknob. Nothing. Another step. The floor protested behind me again. A shaky exhale escaped me, sweat trickling down my temple. Then another creak, and another. Footsteps, perfectly timed with mine, mimicking my cadence. My stomach clenched, chest tight. Reversing direction, though disorientation made back a relative concept. I groped along the wall, fingertips sliding over the strangely textured wallpaper, moving as fast as I dared. 3 steps, and utter confusion descended. The hallway seemed to writhe around me. I pressed on, each footfall echoing hollowly, pursued by that relentless, rhythmic creaking. After an eternity measured in heartbeats, my knuckles struck the edge of a door frame. Relief surged as the knob turned under my grasp. My bedroom door. I fell inside, slammed it, bolted it. Leaning against the wood, chest heaving, drenched in cold sweat, throat painfully dry, hands shaking violently. I forced slow, deliberate breaths until the tremors subsided enough to move. The bedroom light switch worked. I sank onto the bed, heart still racing. A decision formed, solid and absolute. No more nocturnal excursions. The shifting corridor, the phantom footsteps. I couldn't face them again. I accepted it now. The hallway transforms at night. Why? How? Irrelevant. It is happening and worsening. So here I sit, past midnight again, gaze fixed on the door. The corridor feels longer each night. I'm sure of it. 5 steps by day, 8, 9, perhaps more, by night. The doors rearrange themselves like pieces on an unseen board. Explaining this invites disbelief, pity, perhaps fear, of me. So I remain here, hoping abstention offers sanctuary. If I don't cross the threshold in darkness, perhaps I remain safe. The terror whispers that next time, should I venture out, the return path might vanish entirely. I might simply wander that elastic darkness, the echoing steps drawing closer, until breath fails me. Practicalities intrude. Bottled water, snacks stockpiled in the room, a portable toilet. The thought is humiliating, yet preferable to opening that door. This is my reality now. A hateful, circumscribed existence, yet escape feels impossible. Perhaps writing this, giving it form, might diminish its power. A foolish hope, likely. The corridor is aberrant. Pretense is futile. Daylight offers a temporary reprieve, a navigable space. But sundown awakens. It animates the space between the walls. It feels sentient and hostile to my presence. So I wait in my room, alone, for the dawn. Hoping it's enough. Hoping for the courage one day to leave this place behind forever. Until then, I listen to the faint creaks beyond the door, dreading the moment they pause just outside. The invitation arrived like a whispered promise. A cabin nestled deep in the woods, a weekend surgically removed from the city's relentless pulse. Colleagues, yes, but the easy kind. Silas, Leo, Clara, and me. The sort you could share comfortable silence with. We sought refuge, perhaps some trail-worn catharsis. The journey itself felt like shedding an old skin, asphalt yielding to gravel, then to a rutted track that seemed to digest the car before finally depositing us before the structure. Hewn timber, half swallowed by sentinel pines under an immense sky. Isolation, absolute and profound. The air, thick with the scent of loam and decaying leaves, pressed against the eardrums. A silence so complete, it felt less like absence, and more like something listening intently. A world spun from different threads. We were four souls briefly untethered from our usual orbits. The camaraderie flowed effortlessly, a current established in shared deadlines and break-room coffee, requiring no careful navigation here. That first sun-drenched day unfolded with idyllic grace. The companionable sizzle of food over coals, the lazy clink of bottles, conversation meandering like the unseen creek nearby. Simple perfection, unadorned. Then dusk began to bleed indigo across the treetops, drawing us towards the fire pit's magnetic, flickering heart. It was Silas, naturally, who first punctured the tranquil membrane. A grin, sharp and knowing in the firelight, played on his lips. "This place," he began, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial hush. "It carries stories, not just empty years. The last soul who called this home vanished, utterly, left supper half-eaten on the table, or so the whispers go." We offered the expected polite chuckles. Silas relished the role of resident spookmonger, but tonight, his usual mischievous glint was absent, replaced by an unsettling earnestness. "No, I'm serious. Ask around the nearest town. If you can find anyone will talk about it. They say it's occupied by things unseen. Sounds drift out on the wind late at night. Folks have wandered this way before and simply ceased to be." Leo scoffed, a short, sharp sound of dismissal. "Right, Silas. Heard that one before." But Clara drew her jacket tighter, her gaze flicking nervously towards the impenetrable wall of black trees that ringed our small clearing. "Can we please not?" she murmured, her voice thin as spider silk. "Discuss such unsettling things when we're so far from everything." The mood fractured. We forced laughter, changing the subject. but a seed of unease had been sown. The woods after dark, I reflected, possessed a unique talent for making every shadow breathe, every silence teem with possibility. Eventually, a pleasant exhaustion claimed us. The cabin offered 2 rooms beneath its low-slung roof. Leo and I took one, Silas and Clara the other. Sleep descended upon me almost instantly, a heavy velvet curtain dropping across consciousness, until the dead heart of the night. Something, a sound, a shift in the immense quiet, prized my eyes open. What was it? Pitch darkness clung to the corners of the small room, absolute save for the soft, rhythmic cadence of Leo's breathing from the other bed. I lay suspended in the blackness, adrift between sleep and waking awareness. Then, tap, faint, hesitant, against the window pane beside my bed. Tap. My own breath hitched. Tap. Soft, yet distinct. Not a branch scraping, surely. The sound was too delicate, like fingernails perhaps, lightly stroking the glass. My heart began a frantic, muffled drum against my ribs. I strained my ears, listening through the thick silence. Leo slept on, oblivious. A branch, I told myself again, swaying in a non-existent breeze. But the rhythm was too steady, too deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Measured, patient, aware, as if whatever lingered inches away on the other side of the glass knew we were within. Then abruptly, silence flooded back, amplifying the ringing in my ears. A shaky exhalation escaped my lips. Nerves, I reasoned. Imagination running riot at the unfamiliar dark. Yet as I squeezed my eyes shut, willing sleep to return, an unshakable sensation lingered. Unseen eyes fixed upon the cabin, observing. Morning light, thin and gray, did little to dispel the residue of the night. Over lukewarm coffee and burnt toast, I hesitantly mentioned the nocturnal disturbance. Silas seized upon it with predictable relish. "See?" he crowed, eyes gleaming with morbid satisfaction. "Told you this place had teeth." But Clara went visibly pale, her mug trembling in her grip. "You're not serious. Tell me you're just trying to scare us." I offered a shrug, attempting a nonchalance I didn't feel. "Probably nothing. Wind rattling something loose, maybe." She remained unconvinced, her eyes wide and shadowed. For the remainder of the day, a palpable tension became the 5th member of our party. Clara became a satellite orbiting the cabin's relative safety, refusing solitary ventures even a few yards into the whispering woods. A prickle of guilt troubled me for voicing my fear, yet a deeper, more profound disquiet hummed beneath my skin, a low-frequency vibration of wrongness. That evening, we retreated indoors early, the unspoken anxiety, a tangible presence in the lamplit room. In the oppressive dark of the bedroom, I lay rigid, every nerve ending attuned to the profound silence outside, anticipating. Around the time the world outside turned truly depthless and absolute, it began anew. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes snapped open, frozen again, pulse hammering a frantic rhythm against my sternum, the same delicate, deliberate cadence against the glass. Beside me, Leo remained a still landscape of slumber, but this time, something else threaded through the tapping, a susurrus, insidious and low. Whispers, like dry leaves skittering across stone, or voices held just below the threshold of comprehension. The words remained elusive, formless, yet their presence was undeniable. A cold dread, sharp and piercing, snaked up my spine. "Wake, Leo?" Alert him? A profound paralysis held me fast. I lay entombed in the darkness, captive to the infernal duet of rhythmic tapping and indistinct murmuring that seemed to stretch into an elastic eternity before finally, blessedly, ceasing. Sleep, when it eventually reclaimed me, was a shallow, troubled state, a landscape haunted by unanswered questions and formless fears. The next dawn felt fragile, breakable. When I recounted the night's dual visitation, the persistent tapping, the insidious whispering, Clara looked utterly undone. "This isn't amusing, Silas," she choked out, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "If this is one of your elaborate, twisted jokes." But Silas shook his head, genuine concern etching lines around his eyes, erasing his usual smirk. "Cross my heart. It wasn't me. Slept like the dead. Heard nothing." The day passed under a heavy pall. Every creak of the cabin's ancient floorboards, every rustle in the surrounding undergrowth, sent jolts of adrenaline through us. Even Silas, typically the master of manufactured scares, seemed subdued, casting frequent, nervous glances towards the dense, unreadable tree line. The woods felt different now, not just remote, but watchful, possessed of a subtle malevolence. That night, sleep was a banished concept. We huddled together in the main room, lamps blazing defiantly against the encroaching tidal wave of darkness outside, conversations sputtering in fits and starts, punctuated by long, loaded silences. But the inevitable could only be delayed, not avoided. Retreating to our separate rooms felt like walking willingly towards a precipice in the fog. I lay in the dark, taut as a drawn bowstring, every muscle screaming with tension, waiting. And it came. Tap, tap, tap. Louder this time, harder, an insistent, impatient demand rattling the window pane. I bolted upright in bed, breath sawing in my throat, my mind a whirlwind of pure fear. Across the narrow space, Leo was suddenly awake, his eyes huge and stark white in the gloom, fixed on mine. "God, what is that?" he breathed, the words trembling, barely audible. Then the whispering joined the assault, no longer faint or indistinct, but chillingly clear. A dry, rasping sound coiling just outside the thin barrier of glass. Were those names? Ours. Mumbled, distorted, ancient-sounding, yet undeniably beckoning. A visceral, paralyzing cold flooded my veins. Escape. The imperative screamed through my consciousness. Now. I scrambled across the floorboards, grabbing Leo's arm, hauling him towards the door with a strength born of terror. We spilled into the narrow hallway, adrenaline singing in our ears, and threw open the door to the other bedroom. Silas and Clara were huddled together on their bed, faces spectral in the ambient dark, filtering from the main room, eyes wide with a shared, primal terror. "We're leaving," I gasped, the command ripped raw from my throat. "Right now." No questions were asked, no arguments offered. A frantic scramble ensued. Keys fumbled, coats grabbed, essential bags snatched. Anything vital claimed, everything else abandoned without a second thought. We plunged out of the cabin door into the suffocating ink-black night, the colossal pines looming over us like ancient, disapproving judges. We didn't dare look back, didn't dare pause, stumbling towards the car. The engine roaring to life felt like the first clean breath drawn in days. A shield, a against the pressing dark. As we tore down the rutted track, the cabin shrinking rapidly in the rearview mirror, the sounds seemed to cling for one dreadful moment. The insistent tapping, the sibilant whispering, pursuing us, before finally being swallowed by the engine's growl and the vast, indifferent silence of the forest. Silence descended within the car, thick and heavy, saturated with unspoken horror. The fear, however, hadn't faded with the cabin's disappearance. It rode with us, a cold, invisible passenger, all the way back towards the distant, indifferent glow of city lights. We never spoke of returning. Some doors, once opened, reveal depths best left unexplored, forever sealed. The terminal hummed with a low thrum of exhaustion, a cavern of stale air and flickering fluorescent lights deep past the midnight hour. Outside, the tarmac slept under a starless sky. Inside, weary bodies slumped in molded plastic chairs, adrift in the limbo of a delayed departure. Fatigue gnawed at me, a dull ache behind the eyes, yet a strange alertness kept sleep at bay, sharpening the edges of the scene. It was then my gaze snagged on him, a man, perhaps mid-40s, etching a restless path back and forth between the rows of vacant seats. He wore the profound weariness of long journeys, a kindred spirit in transit purgatory. Eventually, his pacing ceased, and he settled into a seat diagonally across the aisle, offering a brief, polite upturn of the lips. I acknowledged it with a faint nod, filing the interaction away with countless other airport oddities encountered over years of travel. He seemed unremarkable, another transient soul waiting out the clock. When he gestured, murmuring something about the empty seat beside me, a flicker of conversation didn't seem unwelcome in the echoing quiet. "Go ahead," I offered, a shrug rippling through tired shoulders. He introduced himself, Silas, and I murmured my own name in return, the sound barely registering even to me. The ensuing dialogue was thin, predictable. Where was I bound? Home, I replied. He nodded, mentioning some obscure destination, a name that evaporated the moment he spoke it. His questions, however, began to accumulate, small probes landing with a frequency that pricked at my reserve. I attributed it to the shared boredom, the universal need to fill the void of waiting. My answers grew clipped, deliberate invitations to silence, but he pressed onward, undeterred. He began to unfurl fragments of his own existence, a life spent navigating highways in the solitary cab of a truck, perpetual motion his only constant. Children were mentioned, distant figures disconnected by miles and silence. Loneliness radiated from him, a palpable thing. A sliver of empathy softened my irritation. Listening cost nothing, a small kindness in this anonymous space. But the current shifted. His inquiries veered sharply inward, seeking details about my routines, my connections, the specifics of my own small world. Terrain utterly irrelevant to this fleeting exchange. Attempts to redirect the conversation were futile. He'd circle back relentlessly, his gaze unwavering, dissecting each flicker of expression on my face. A knot tightened in my stomach, a nascent discomfort I tried to rationalize away as mere social awkwardness, the byproduct of isolation. Salvation arrived via the tinny voice crackling over the public address system. Our flight, finally preparing for boarding. Relief flooded me, cool and immediate. I rose, muttering an excuse about gathering my belongings, a clear signal for separation. Yet, he rose too, mirroring my movement, positioning himself a breath too close as I angled towards the forming queue. A backward glance, meant as a subtle pushback, found him precisely there, an unnerving proximity that stole the air. Coincidence, I insisted silently, just eagerness shared by all the weary travelers. But he didn't yield the space. Reaching the gate agent, I extended my boarding pass. Eyes fixed determinedly ahead, willing him to dissolve into the background. Instead, he materialized directly beside me. "I'm with her," he stated, his voice calm, addressing the agent. "We're traveling together." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I swiveled, mouth agape, searching for words, but he continued his assertion, weaving a narrative of shared seating, of companionship. The agent's eyes darted between us, a mask of professional confusion. "No," I finally choked out, the word thin and reedy. "No, we're not. I don't know him." A frown creased the agent's brow as Silas persisted, his tone measured, almost practiced. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. Just as the word security formed on my lips, he relented. "Fine," he conceded, his voice suddenly devoid of warmth, laced with something akin to disappointment. "If that's how you want it." He gave me one last, hard, indecipherable look before turning sharply and melting back into the thinning crowd. A shaky exhale escaped me, but the sensation of being watched lingered, a prickle on my skin. I hurried onto the plane, seeking refuge in the assigned anonymity of my seat, telling myself the encounter was closed, a bizarre footnote. Then, buckling my belt, my gaze drifted down the aisle. There he stood, framed in the aircraft's entrance, deep in conversation with a flight attendant. The words were lost to distance, but his head tilted, his eyes swept the cabin, and they locked onto mine. I shrank into the upholstery, praying he wouldn't advance. He didn't. After a moment, the attendants shook their heads firmly, a silent refusal. He was forced to retreat, but not before casting one final glance my way, cold, accusatory, as though I had committed some profound betrayal. Upon landing, I retrieved my luggage with frantic haste, navigating the arrival hall at almost a run, each footfall echoing the rhythm of my lingering fear. My head swiveled constantly, scanning faces, expecting his familiar, unsettling presence to emerge from the throng. He wasn't there. I tried to bury the incident, label it an unnerving anomaly, a lonely man whose wires had crossed. Yet the unease never fully subsided. For weeks, crowded streets felt menacing, peripheral movements triggering a jolt of adrenaline. Even now, months later, in the quiet solitude of night, I sometimes feel the phantom weight of that intense, cold stare. Imagine him lingering just beyond the light, patient. And a chilling question surfaces. Will he be waiting at the next gate, ready to resume his claim? Returning late one evening, the first discordance struck me. That old family tableau, canted askew on my living room wall. Again. A familiar constriction tightened around my ribs. Who, the thought echoed in the empty apartment, persists in disturbing this frame? Solitude is my companion here. The locks hold fast. No roommate shares the space. No spare key exists beyond my own keeping. Yet, the portrait hung crooked, nudged off its plumb line as if by an insistent hand. In that instant, the ambient silence of my home curdled into something watchful. Ilara's passing 6 months prior had bequeathed to me a scattering of her possessions, among them the large framed photograph from some sun-bleached decade, the 1970s. Within its borders resided my grandparents, Arthur and Eleanor, staid and unsmiling. My mother Ilara, caught in the fragile bloom of adolescence, and flanking them, my uncles, Silas and Quentin. Receiving it, I'd felt an odd resonance, a pull, as if the sepia tones held braided histories I couldn't untangle. It captured a version of my mother utterly alien to my own experience, a ghost from a time before my own breath. Duty-bound, perhaps sentimentally so, I'd mounted it in the living room, a silent greeting each morning as I departed. The first anomaly surfaced on a quiet Sunday morning. Crossing the living room threshold, my gaze snagged on the portrait, tilted, perhaps 2 inches off, its lower right corner dipping earthward, as if an unseen hand had nudged it. The nail I'd driven was robust, the wire secure. Why would it shift? I corrected its alignment, dismissing it, perhaps an inadvertent bump, though the apartment had held only me, and the wall remained unapproached. Days later, twilight settling outside, I returned from the city's grind. Setting my satchel upon the sofa, my eyes lifted, askew again, but reversed now, the left edge sagging, not dramatically, yet undeniably unbalanced. I drew near, scrutinizing the hardware. The nail stood firm, the wire looped correctly upon it. No apparent defect marred the frame's backing. I leveled it once more. Humidity, I offered myself. A phantom draft. But summer held sway, windows sealed against the heat when I was absent. No breeze whispered here. No earthly reason presented itself. I sought refuge in routine. The television flickered to life. Dinner warmed in the microwave's hum. An hour dissolved. Then a casual glance sideways. Crooked again. Same slant, left side low. A dryness scraped my throat. A chill traced the skin of my arms. I stared fixedly at the assembly within the frame. Arthur and Eleanor, locked in their formal pose. Silas and Quentin, rigid behind the chairs. And Ilara, seated beside Eleanor, offering a faint smile. But the smile, it felt altered, less benign than memory painted it. Had I merely imagined its previous warmth? Approaching, I righted the frame, pressing my palm flat against it for a long moment, willing it to stay. Sleep offered little respite. Around 3 a.m, I surfaced, convinced of a soft scuffling, perhaps footfalls, drifting from the corridor. Light flooded the apartment as I rose, heart hammering a frantic rhythm. Every room yielded emptiness. Doors remained bolted, windows secured. The portrait, perfectly straight. Back in bed, the pounding in my chest refused to subside. My gaze fixed on the shadowed ceiling until consciousness finally frayed. 3 days passed. Saturday afternoon found me immersed in cleaning, damp cloth in hand, poised to wipe the portrait's glass. My own reflection stared back, but hovering just beyond my shoulder in the glass, a spectral suggestion flickered, a nebulous face, utterly unknown, blurred, peripheral, yet undeniably there. I spun, finding only empty air. A clammy sweat broke out on my palms. Glare, I insisted internally, a smudge on the glass. I polished it meticulously, yet an oppressive energy permeated the room, a palpable weight settling onto my chest. These unsettling notions, I tried to banish them. Grief, surely, was the culprit, projecting sorrow onto inanimate glass and paper. yet the small, persistent disturbances accumulated. Alara's smile in the photograph continued its subtle, yet undeniable morph. What once seemed soft, almost hesitant, now looked strained, the corners of her mouth taut, lips faintly downturned. The welcoming expression I thought I remembered had vanished. Perhaps the room's shifting light, perhaps my own darkening mood. But each passage past the frame reinforced the disquieting sense of transformation. Late one night, near 11, fetching water from the kitchen, I heard it. A low, abrasive whisper emanated from the living room, the distinct drag of something against plaster. I froze, listening, skin prickling. Silence fell once more. Tiptoeing toward the living room archway, I flicked the switch. Light spilled across the scene. The portrait tilted again, right side dipped by an inch. A ragged breath escaped me, my legs feeling suddenly unreliable. Reaching out, my fingers brushed the frame. Cold. Not just cool, but unnaturally cold to the touch, a stark contrast to the ambient temperature of the wall behind it. My gaze locked onto the image. Alara's eyes, they seemed different, sharper, focused directly upon me, not gazing emptily outward. Preposterous, yet the feeling washed over me. Scrutiny, tinged with something akin to concern, or perhaps disapproval. Tremors ran through my hands as I straightened the frame. I slept with the hall light burning that night. The following week, I immersed myself in work, a frantic shield against the unease. Early departures, late returns, hurried meals, and then sleep. But the portrait remained a focal point of dread. Passing it, I'd catch peripheral flickers within the glass, reflections seeming to stir when I stood perfectly still. Frustration boiled over one evening. "Stop it!" I snapped at the empty room, the words feeling absurd even as they left my lips. Who was I addressing? The sheer helplessness of it fueled the outburst. Thursday evening, returning near 8 after an exhausting day, I pushed open my door, switched on the light, and stopped cold. The portrait was no longer on the wall. It rested against the baseboard, angled upward, less fallen than deliberately positioned. The wire remained looped over the nail, which was still embedded firmly in the plaster. How could it possibly rest like that? It hadn't crashed. It seemed placed. I stood rooted, the thudding of my heart echoing in my ears. Drawing closer, my hand outstretched toward the frame, I saw it. A fine, sharp fissure marred the glass, slicing directly across Alara's pictured cheek. A thin line, stark against the aged photograph. Touching it confirmed the slight groove. It was fresh. My obsessive scrutiny of the image guaranteed that. On the wall itself, behind where the frame had hung, a small chip of paint was missing near the nail, as if the portrait had been wrenched away, not slipped. Panic surged. A break-in. But nothing else was disturbed. The television, the laptop on the table, all untouched. The front door had been locked. Windows remained latched. No sign of forced entry. Lifting the portrait, I carried it to the sofa. My breathing grew shallow, my stomach twisting into knots. How? The question hammered relentlessly. The nail held. The wire was sound. Logic offered no purchase. I mentally retraced every possibility. Checked the door frame for scratches, the lock for tampering. Nothing. Each window latch was secure. I even performed a ridiculous, thorough search of closets and cabinets, seeking an intruder I knew wasn't there. Empty. Picking up the frame again, I examined the scratch. It traced the curve of Alara's cheek with unnerving precision, halting exactly at the edge of her face, as if guided by a meticulous, sharp point. My finger followed the jagged path. The hair on my neck prickled. My hands shook violently now, sweat beading on my forehead. Gently, I laid the frame flat on the coffee table. Hanging it back felt impossible, wrong. That night, the bedroom door was locked. Dramatic, perhaps, but a profound wave of fear had washed over me, leaving my hands icy, my throat constricted. Something was intrinsically wrong with that portrait, yet the thought of discarding it felt like a betrayal. Of Alara, of the frozen moment of family it represented. Guilt warred with terror. I was utterly adrift, unsure how to navigate this creeping dread. Morning arrived early. In the living room, the portrait lay undisturbed on the coffee table. I stared at the scratch, that thin, violent line rupturing the glass. Touching it again yielded the same grim confirmation. Hoping for some clue, I carefully removed the cardboard backing. The photograph itself showed its age, faded and delicate, but the scratch hadn't penetrated the paper. It was confined to the glass surface. Nothing else seemed amiss. The urge to stow it away, perhaps in a closet, was strong, yet felt deeply disrespectful. A shower, strong coffee, attempts to anchor myself in normalcy. Throughout the day, I skirted that corner of the living room, each pass accompanied by a jolt of anxiety. I eventually called a friend, mentioning only vague, weird noises, unwilling to voice the full extent of the strangeness, unwilling to sound unhinged. Their offer to visit was politely declined. The thought of external scrutiny, of dismissal, was unbearable. This felt like a solitary burden. Later that afternoon, a desperate impulse toward normalcy led me to try rehanging the portrait. Same nail, same wire. I double-checked its levelness, stepped back. It looked ordinary. For an hour, I watched it intermittently. It held. Relief began to tentatively bloom. Then, retreating to the kitchen for a drink, I heard it. Not a crash, but a soft, dull thump. Rushing back, I found the portrait exactly as before, resting on the floor, propped against the wall. The wire still encircled the nail, as though carefully unhooked and deposited. I hadn't seen it move. I only witnessed the quiet aftermath. My heart hammered against my ribs, heat flushing my face. Lifting it again, setting it back on the sofa, I simply stood there, mind reeling. No sound of entry, no presence but my own. Windows checked again, secure, utterly inexplicable. I sat heavily on the sofa, gaze drawn inexorably to Alara's face in the photograph. Her expression seemed colder now, more remote, though perhaps that was merely my fear painting its own interpretation. Enough. I couldn't contend with it anymore that day. I carried the portrait to the spare room, placing it beside some storage boxes. Closing the door felt like sealing away a contagion. I tried to lose myself in television, in mundane tasks, but the feeling persisted, a sense of awareness emanating from behind that closed door. My shoulders remained knotted with tension. Conscious effort was required to breathe evenly. Every creak of the floorboards, the sudden ring of my phone, made me flinch. I was utterly frayed. For the subsequent nights, the hallway light remained on. Nothing else shifted. No further sounds disturbed the quiet. yet relaxation remained elusive. The very air in my apartment felt altered, heavier somehow, charged with an unseen static. The memory of that scratch, bisecting my mother's face, lingered persistently. Was it random damage from a fall that wasn't a fall? Or did its precise placement hold some terrible significance? No explanation offers itself. All I possess is the chilling certainty that followed finding the frame upon the floor, bearing its scar. This portrait harbors something beyond my comprehension. Comfort feels like a distant shore, and so I remain, wary each time I pass the spare room door, gripped by a low hum of dread, wondering what subtle or stark transformation awaits the next time it's opened. The first collision slammed me forward, the restraint biting deep into my sternum. A second impact, vicious and deliberate, sent my machine slewing towards the unforgiving steel of the guardrail, my hands wrestling the wheel against an unseen force. One incandescent certainty burned through the shock. This was no accident. This was a hunt. It had begun as just another day, dissolving into dusk. I, Elias Thorne, was navigating the long miles home from a business engagement, a 6-hour pilgrimage etched into muscle memory. The sun bled across the western sky, a breathtaking spectacle of molten orange and bruised violet. How beautiful, I'd mused. How utterly serene. A serenity poised on the precipice of annihilation. 4 hours had melted away on the asphalt ribbon, the highway's hypnotic drone punctuated only by fleeting glimpses of roadside sanctuaries and slumbering towns. As twilight deepened into true night, traffic dwindled, leaving vast, empty stretches where my vehicle sailed alone. The solitude had always been a comfort, a welcome companion on these nocturnal journeys. Then, the first tremor of wrongness. Twin circles of light materialized in the rearview mirror. They hung there, suspended in the darkness behind me, maintaining an unnerving, constant distance. Initially, I dismissed it. Highways breed fellow travelers, but mile after relentless mile, they shadowed me, refusing the open lanes. A silent, persistent echo. Unease prickled my skin. A gentle tap on the brakes. A silent question. Too close. The lights behind surged, swallowing the buffer zone. My pulse quickened. This was not the rhythm of the road. Pressure on the accelerator. Distance opened, a brief respite. Then inevitably, the pursuing lights intensified, matching my surge. What in God's name? I breathed, eyes flicking between the dark void ahead and the menacing glare behind. Those twin beams seemed to brighten, to sharpen with predatory focus. Pulling over felt instinctively wrong, a surrender. Whoever piloted that shadow machine harbored malice. Escape, or finding sanctuary among others, was the only play. I pushed the engine harder, urging my car towards velocities it rarely tasted. A high-pitched whine answered, a mechanical protest against the strain. Behind me, the other vehicle kept pace. An inescapable phantom latched onto my trajectory. Sweat slicked my palms, knuckles bleached white against the wheel. I wove, a desperate dance across lanes, hoping to break the invisible tether. They mirrored every move, fluidly, terrifyingly. That's when the first blow landed. A brutal concussion to the rear bumper, snapping the car sideways like a startled fish. I wrestled it straight, the frantic drumming in my chest drowning out the engine's roar. All right, I heard myself rasp, forcing air into constricted lungs. All right, it's real. Think, Elias. Think. A fumbling hand sought my phone, the other clamped rigidly to the wheel. No service. Naturally. Nothing but dense, swallowing forest flanking the highway. Nowhere. The next violation came from the flank. The hunter had drawn parallel, then swerved violently, metal shrieking against metal as it slammed into my passenger side. The world became a dizzying spin towards the guardrail, a savage wrench of the wheel, a prayer, and somehow, miraculously, I held the road. Adrenaline detonated within me, a clarifying, terrifying wave. Not rage, attempted murder. An exit sign flashed ahead, a sudden promise. Impulse took over. I sliced across 2 lanes, tires screaming descent, and plunged onto the off-ramp. The pursuer followed, but the abrupt maneuver had bought me precious yards. The exit bled onto a narrow, serpentine track, threading through the woods. Under sane conditions, this speed on such a road would be madness. Conditions were far from sane. I flogged the engine, throwing the car into bends so acute the tires threatened to leave the tarmac. In the mirror, a fleeting glimpse. The hunter struggled, losing ground on the treacherous curves. A fragile spark ignited within the terror. Hope. It died almost instantly. Rounding a particularly vicious hairpin, my headlamps painted a scene that froze the marrow in my bones. The way forward was completely obstructed by a colossal fallen tree, a barricade nature itself had erected. Brakes shrieked, gravel spitting as the tires lost purchase. Time dilated, stretching into an agonizing crawl. The tree loomed, immense, inescapable. The squeal of tires echoed from behind. This was it. The end. A final, convulsive twist of the wheel. My car bucked off the road, tearing into the dense undergrowth. Branches lashed the windshield like skeletal fingers. A violent, jarring passage through tangled vegetation, bouncing and crashing, until, with a final shudder, silence. Stillness. I sat, hands welded to the wheel, breath tearing through me in ragged gasps. Alive. Against all odds. Alive. The snarl of an engine ripped through the quiet, yanking me back to the horrifying present. They were still there, still hunting. I killed my lights, sinking low in the seat, praying the thick foliage was an adequate shroud. I heard their machine slow, then halt. A door opened, slammed shut. Footsteps crunched on the gravel track, drawing nearer. A blade of light sliced through the darkness, sweeping, probing. Breath held captive in my lungs. I became stone. The footsteps paused, unnervingly close. The light danced over leaves mere inches from my refuge. Come out, a voice called, the tone sickly playful, curdling the night air. Can't hide forever. Frozen. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, surely loud enough to betray me. The footsteps paced, retreated, returned. A torturous game of predator and prey, played out in agonizing slow motion. Minutes stretched into perceived hours. Finally, a grunt of pure frustration. Damn it. Lost him. The steps receded. A car door slammed. An engine roared. tires spitting gravel as it sped away into the darkness. Long after the sound vanished completely, I remained motionless, coiled tight, convinced it was a ruse. As the adrenaline tide ebbed, the stark reality washed over me. Stranded, deep woods, car likely crippled, a homicidal stranger potentially lurking nearby, and still, the phone remained useless. Panic threatened, a brief, shuddering sob escaping before I ruthlessly clamped down. Dissolving now was a luxury I couldn't afford. A plan. Staying put felt like waiting in a trap, but venturing into the black, pathless forest seemed equally perilous. Survival's primal scream won out. Staying was death deferred. Wallet, phone, the small emergency torch from the glove box. My meager provisions. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, I eased the door open, the click echoing unnaturally loud. Outside, the forest breathed around me. Whispering leaves, the eerie calls of nocturnal birds, the scurry of unseen creatures. Every snap of a twig was a phantom footfall at my back. I chose a direction, arbitrary yet decisive, and moved, striving for silence, guided only by the moon's spectral glow filtering through the canopy. Time lost meaning. Hours crawled by, each second stretching a taut with nerve-shredding tension. Every shadow writhed with imagined menace. Just as despair began its cold creep, threatening to buckle my knees, to make me curl up and wait for fate, I saw it. A distant light, faint, yet undeniably man-made. A surge of desperate energy propelled me forward, ignoring the stinging scratches, the burning ache in my legs. Closer now, it resolved into a small cabin. Smoke curled from its chimney. Warm light spilled from its windows like a beacon. I stumbled out of the tree line, a wild, disheveled apparition. An elderly couple seated peacefully on their porch, jolted upright, startled by my sudden, ragged emergence. "Please," I choked out, my voice a raw whisper. "Help me! Someone trying to kill me!" The aftermath remains a fragmented montage. Flashing lights, paramedics, the insistent drone of questions. They never found the hunter. The pursuing car surfaced miles away, abandoned, reported stolen from a town I'd unknowingly passed through hours before. In the ensuing weeks, months, the why gnawed at me. Random violence, or something chillingly personal. The not knowing became its own form of torture. Driving became an ordeal. Even now, years removed, long stretches of highway awaken a dormant anxiety. The rearview mirror is a constant checkpoint, every vehicle a potential echo of that night. But I endured. I outmaneuvered, outlasted. That knowledge is an anchor. I am not defined by the terror, but by the survival. I carry the scars, yes, but also the unshakable truth. No matter how dark the road ahead, I possess the strength to reach the other side. The summons arrived scarcely a month past, delivered via the dry tones of a solicitor. Silas Thorne, a name dredged from the silt of childhood memory, my great-uncle thrice removed, had bequeathed unto me his collection of rare books. An unexpected legacy, certainly, yet curiosity trumped indifference. 2 weeks hence found me navigating the shadowed threshold of his antiquated residence, affixing my signature to stiff documents before wrestling a ponderous oak repository, burdened with volumes thick with the dust of ages, into my possession. Initially, they remained uncatalogued columns in my living space, awaiting a moment of focused energy I perpetually deferred, until one volume snagged my attention, its binding peculiar, obsidian smooth beneath my touch. Its pages, when tentatively riffled, whispered, a delicate melodic susurrus. A faint electric prickle danced across my fingertips whenever contact was made. Imagination, I reasoned. Yet it was this singular tome I revisited, leaving its brethren untouched in their dusty repose. Thus, the overture began. Once liberated from its ancestral home, the bookshelf found its station against a wall in my study. Silence reigned elsewhere in my modest dwelling, a place of unadorned furniture and uncomplicated design, where I lived alone. My study itself offered little more than a wooden desk, a wheeled chair, and a solitary lamp. I eschew ornamentation, preferring clarity, uncluttered vistas. That evening, the anomalous volume claimed pride of place upon my desk. Leaning back, I eased it open. The pages possessed an ancient fragility, yet yielded without undue resistance. As they turned, that soft sound returned, evocative of a distant music box, but lacking any grating quality. Initially, it felt almost soporific. Faded Latinate script adorned the title page, elegant yet indistinct. Though largely indecipherable to me, fragments like tempest and port surfaced from the lexical fog. Flipping further pages amplified the sound subtly, its gentle persistence forestalling alarm. My finger traced the lines of text, a futile attempt at comprehension that yielded only a peculiar sensation deep in my chest. Not pain, but a constriction, a silent demand for deeper breaths. Setting the book aside, I resolved to seek rest. That night, sleep came untroubled. The second night drew me back to the stark geometry of my study. Darkness held sway beyond the small lamp's amber pool, illuminating the enigmatic volume, closed upon the desk. Opening it unleashed the melody anew, slow, deceptively simple, yet possessing an insistent gravity that pulled my focus, coaxing an unconscious hum from my lips. Then, a subtle phenomenon, the pages, left untended, seemed to drift with an unseen current, settling almost deliberately upon specific tracts of text. A faint jolt, like static seeking ground, tingled in my fingertips as I tilted my head. Turning more leaves caused the melody to modulate, shifting key with an eerie fluidity. A sudden dryness constricted my throat. I swallowed, compelling myself to decipher the script. My Latin is fragmentary at best, yet I hazarded pronouncing a few words aloud. Stumbling utterances, yet each spoken phrase seemed to swell the melody momentarily before it subsided back into its low, hypnotic thrum. My heart commenced a frantic tattoo against my ribs. A cold dew bloomed on my brow, incongruous in the room's cool air, admitted through the open window. A tension coiled within me. My very sternum felt as though it vibrated with a sympathetic resonance. Abruptly, I snapped the book shut, rose, and retreated. The kitchen offered sanctuary and a glass of water, my reflection staring back from the blank wall as I willed my breathing to steady. Nothing else felt amiss, yet an undeniable sense of observation prickled the back of my neck. Solitude offered no comfort, only the conviction I was unnerving myself. I dismissed it, seeking the oblivion of sleep. On the third night, the melody asserted itself with greater presence. It greeted me the instant I breached the study doorway, emanating from the closed book upon the desk like phantom radio waves bleeding into the silence. A knot tightened in my stomach. Approaching the desk, I extended a hesitant hand. Touching the cover caused the melody to surge briefly. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm in my ears. A visceral chill traced paths down my arms. Opening the volume revealed pages that seemed to flicker at their edges, a subtle ripple disturbing the paper's surface. I rubbed my eyes, but the visual distortion persisted. Attempting indifference, I turned several pages. The archaic Latin remained dense, impenetrable, though certain lines recurred across disparate leaves. I tried voicing them again. "Aperi, Yanuam," I whispered, my voice an unsteady tremor. The melody transformed, coalescing into a sustained, swirling hum that enveloped my hearing. Simultaneously, a distinct pressure materialized on my shoulder, like the gentle weight of fingers. I spun around. Empty air. Yet the pressure lingered, a tactile ghost raising gooseflesh. With a sharp exhalation, I slammed the book shut, dragging a hand across my suddenly clammy face. My mouth was parchment dry. Forcing stillness upon weakened knees, I finally seized the book and consigned it to a desk drawer. Extinguishing the lamp, I quit the room, haunted by the lingering sensation. Sleep that night was a shallow, restless affair. In the subsequent days, the book exhibited a disquieting autonomy. I'd discover it resting upon the desk despite my certainty of having secured it within the drawer. On occasion, I integrated it amongst its shelf-bound peers, only to find it open on my desk the following day, invariably displaying the same Latin passage. One phrase dominated, "Aperi Yanuam." A quick search on my phone confirmed its stark meaning. Open the door. I endeavored to ignore this escalating strangeness, immersing myself in the mundane rhythms of work, errands, domestic chores. Yet each evening upon returning home, the faint melody was the first sound to greet me, an insidious welcome. Unprompted pressures bloomed in my chest. Tingling sensations traced random paths along my arms. At night, sibilant murmurs sometimes skittered at the edge unhearing from the hallway, their words indistinct. An unnatural chill pervaded the house, defying the mild weather outside. I took to wearing a jacket indoors, a futile defense. My breath hitched whenever I neared the study. Persistent headaches throbbed behind my eyes. Thoughts of sedatives, of seeking medical counsel, flickered, but I clung to the rationalization of stress. The fifth night found me seeking refuge in the living room's artificial glare, the television volume elevated in a deliberate attempt to drown out any intrusions from the study. Remote clutched tight, I feigned relaxation. Around midnight, the screen stuttered. Channel surfing proved fruitless. The flickering persisted. Then, behind me, insinuating itself beneath the television's drone, arose the melody, drifting from the hallway. Every muscle tensed. Setting down the remote, I rose on stiffened legs and moved towards the sound's source. The study door stood slightly ajar, a violation of the closure I distinctly remembered enforcing. Pushing it wider revealed the book, centered on the desk. Open, its pages fluttering, as if turned by an invisible hand. The rustle of paper was clearly audible, though the fan remained still, the window sealed. Nothing else stirred. As I stepped closer, the melody gained clarity, sharpening its focus. That familiar pressure returned to my shoulder, an invisible hand steadying me, or perhaps urging me onward. My heart's frantic beating resonated in my temples. Leaning down, I scanned the text. The words seemed bolder now, the recurring Latin phrase stark against the aged paper. I sank into the chair, a dull ache registering in my lower back. The seat felt unnaturally cold. I attempted the passage again, striving for clarity. Peri Januum, ab ante ignotum. My recitation faltered, yet I persisted, hands trembling. The melody swelled, encompassing me, and the distinct sensation of breath, cold and close, brushed the back of my neck. My scalp prickled. Halting mid-phrase, I scanned the dim room, the lamp carving stark shadows upon the walls. A faint creak emanated from the corner near the bookshelf. My eyes felt gritty. I blinked rapidly. Picking up the book, I felt the pages vibrate beneath my thumbs. Rising, I tried to leave, but the melody seemed to cling, echoing my steps down the hall. I retreated to my bedroom, shutting the door, the sound now muffled, but not extinguished. Unsure why, I placed the book on my nightstand. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I stared at its inert cover, my breathing shallow, hands numb. Sleep that night was fragmentary, punctuated by jolts of wakefulness, triggered by phantom pressures on my limbs, subtle tugs at the bedsheet, the unshakable conviction of a presence in the room. Morning light revealed the book lying open beside me on the mattress. I had no memory of opening it. With a surge of revulsion, I snatched it up and thrust it into the closet, slamming the door shut. For several days, I actively avoided the study. The book remained confined to the closet, yet the melody became an untethered entity, surfacing unpredictably during my morning shower, as I prepared to leave for work. Never loud, it existed as a persistent subliminal hum threading itself into the fabric of my hearing. My appetite waned. A perpetual heaviness settled behind my eyes. I began searching the house with paranoid diligence for hidden speakers, electronic anomalies, finding nothing. Everything appeared normal, yet the certainty grew. Something within that book demanded my continued attention, my voice. On the 8th night, the compulsion became unbearable. Tremors ran through my hands. My skin felt clammy and cold. The house seemed thick with stagnant air, saturated with the scent of decaying paper, a phantom library overlaying my familiar surroundings. Drawn by an invisible tether, I walked to the closet and pulled open the door. The book lay on the floor, displaced from where I'd hidden it. Bending, I retrieved it. The cover felt unnaturally warm against my fingers. Instantly, the melody sprang to life. Carrying it to the living room, I settled onto the couch. Opening it revealed more Latin text, yet some words seemed altered, the very letters rearranged upon the page. I began to sound them out. With each syllable, the melody intensified, tightening the band around my lungs. My eyes watered, my neck muscles seized. A strange vibration resonated in my jaw as I spoke, my teeth seeming to chatter of their own accord. The words felt guttural, alien on my tongue, yet I pressed on. Under the room's light, the pages themselves appeared to acquire a faint luminescence, their corners shimmering subtly. Sweat pasted my shirt to my back despite the inner chill. Leaning closer, I traced each sentence, forcing steadiness into my voice, though my lips felt cracked, my tongue clumsy. A creeping numbness ascended from my ankles, locking my calves. Then, a distinct rustling sound erupted directly behind me. I whipped my head around. Only the end table lamp and the blank expanse of wall met my gaze. Yet, undeniably, the couch cushion beside me dipped, compressed by an unseen weight. I leaped to my feet, breath tearing from my lungs. The book tumbled from my lap, landing sprawled on the floor. The melody crested, soaring to an almost unbearable pitch, accompanied by a sudden, violent gust of frigid air that swept through the room, whipping strands of hair across my face. Shielding my eyes, I waited. When I looked again, stillness had returned. The melody subsided to a low, pulsing hum. My heart hammered against my ribs. My mouth hung open, gasping. Reaching down, I retrieved the book. It had landed face down, miraculously undamaged. I placed it back on the couch. The hum seemed to throb in time with my racing pulse. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears. Dizziness threatened to overwhelm me. Forcing movement into leaden limbs, I carried the book back towards the study, driven by a desperate need to contain it. I opened a desk drawer, placed the volume inside, and turned the key in the lock. My pulse still galloped. Sweat beaded on my upper lip. My eyes darted nervously around the room, finding everything superficially ordinary. Backing out, I closed the study door firmly, leaving the lamp burning within. That night offered no respite. The melody seeped through the walls, now interwoven with a dry, scratching sound emanating from the vicinity of the study door. I paced the hallway, raking fingers through my hair, wiping my brow. My body remained coiled, primed for flight. "Calm down," I chanted internally, a useless mantra. I switched on every light in the house, verified every window latch. A call to a friend went unanswered, amplifying my isolation. Each recurrence of the scratching sent fresh tremors through me. Leaning against the cool plaster of the hallway wall, I fought to regulate my breathing. Finally, unable to bear the tension, I strode back into the study and yanked at the locked drawer. The lock was fractured, the latch snapped with impossible force. Within, the book lay open, pages fluttering in a silent internal breeze. Reaching to slam it shut ignited the melody into a piercing shriek that resonated within my skull, blurring my vision. Yet, I forced the cover down. A vice clamped around my chest, stealing my breath. How had the lock broken? A tremor seized my limbs, threatening my balance. From a nearby toolbox, I retrieved a roll of coarse duct tape. With shaken hands, I bound the volume, layer upon layer, sealing its covers tight. I thrust it back into the violated drawer, then secured the drawer itself with more tape, crisscrossing strips over the wood. My heart hammered. Breath came in ragged gasps. Crouched there beside the desk, the house fell momentarily silent, save for the frantic rush of blood in my ears. My palms, slick with sweat, left damp patches on my jeans. Eventually, strength returned enough to rise, to retreat from the study. Exhaustion, profound and bone-deep, dragged me toward my bed. Fully clothed, I collapsed onto the mattress, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. The quiet was a fragile skin stretched taut over something waiting. This is the current state of affairs. A faint, almost sub-audible vibration persists in the air around me. Sleep remains elusive, though the melody itself has receded for the past hour. Its return feels inevitable, a looming certainty. What the book truly desires, what culmination awaits should I yield and continue the recitation? These are questions I recoil from answering. For now, I remain here, a sentinel watching a sealed threshold, feeling the frantic rhythm in my chest gradually subside, my gaze fixed upon the study door. Should that insidious melody recommence, I will strive for resistance, though the duration of my resolve remains profoundly uncertain. 6 months since Elias had taken possession of this clapboard house, its paint peeling like sunburned skin. He'd craved a buffer of green, a private sprawl, and this plot, wild and unruly, with shoulder-high weeds and a skeletal fence at its boundary, had whispered promises of solitude. The estate agent, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, had gestured vaguely towards a forgotten circle of stone near the back. An old well, she'd murmured, capped and dormant for generations. A footnote, nothing more. Until Elias, fueled by the nascent energy of spring 2 weeks past, decided to wrestle the wilderness back. He hadn't foreseen that unsealing that stone maw would invite this nightly baptism of cold sweat, this phantom weeping of water that now echoed in the hollows of his home. The memory remains stark, etched by the blaze of the afternoon sun. Elias, clad in stiff work gloves and a sweat-darkened gray shirt, breathed the fecund scent of disturbed soil. A shovel bit into the tangle of creepers, suffocating the wellhead. Beneath the green shroud, oxidation bloomed like crimson lichen across the iron cap, a thick chain threaded through a pitted ring, its only mooring. The metal was dense, ancient, yielding nothing to his initial heave. A crowbar became his lever, groaning against the resistance. The lid finally grated, a sound like fingernails on slate that raised the fine hairs on his arms. Minutes blurred into exertion, pushing the immense weight aside until he stood panting, rivulets of sweat tracing paths through the grime on his skin. Within the shaft, the bricks wept a dark dampness, though the surrounding earth remained parched. Elias inclined his head over the opening, inhaling a breath thick with subterranean stillness and decay that provoked a dry cough. He fumbled for his torch. Its beam sliced the gloom, illuminating the slick, curved walls, and then a fugitive sparkle nestled in a crevice between two upper stones. Leaning further, one gloved hand bracing against the cool rim, his knuckles grazed something compact, unyielding. He set the torch down, its beam pointing skyward, and worked his fingers into the gap. A moment of resistance, then it came free with a jarring suddenness that nearly sent him tumbling forward. A ring. Its band was broad, fashioned from some lustreless, indeterminate metal, pewter perhaps, or tarnished silver. At its heart sat a cabochon of obsidian-like stone, lightless and absorbing. It radiated a profound chill, colder than the stone well rim, colder than the ambient air, an alien coolness that seeped into his palm. As he straightened, peculiar disquiet bloomed beneath his skin, a prickling awareness at the nape of his neck. Impulse, perhaps a nascent, unwise curiosity, made him slide it into his trouser pocket. He wrestled the iron lid back, the clang of its final seating echoing briefly, then turned his attention back to the mundane tyranny of the weeds. Later, beneath the drumming spray of the shower, another rhythm intruded, a furtive plink, 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 out of sync with the plumbing's chorus. Elias twisted the faucet shut, silenced from the showerhead, yet the phantom drip persisted, a delicate, aqueous percussion somewhere within the house's skeleton. He checked the bathroom basin, its chrome tap bone dry. He pressed an ear to the cool tile, listening to the interstitial spaces. The sound faded, elusive as steam. Old houses, he reasoned. They have their groans, their secrets. But sleep, when it finally claimed him, offered no respite. He plunged into the black cylinder of the well, stone rushing past, the air glacial against his face. Far below, a shape coalesced in the oppressive dark, indistinct and still. Then a voice, less heard than felt, a subterranean tremor vibrating through his bones. Return it. He snapped awake, heart hammering against his ribs, sheets clinging damply. The bedroom was a void of black, and the dripping, closer now, impossibly intimate, as if originating beside the bed itself. He lunged for the lamp. Light flooded the room, revealing nothing but familiar shadows. Sleep remained a distant shore. Daylight brought a forced industry. Elias attacked the derelict fence with hammer and new timber, wrestled overgrown shrubs into submission, raked fallen leaves into rustling pyres. Yet, in every pause, every moment of stillness, the aqueous ghost returned. That soft, insistent drip. It was directionless, a ventriloquist's trick of sound, now by the leaning shed, now seeming to emanate from the kitchen wall itself. Just nerves, he told himself, batting away absurd notions of cursed trinkets. By late afternoon, fatigue had settled deep in his bones. Inside, seeking refuge in the cool dimness, he retrieved a soda from the refrigerator's chill. The twist of the cap released a brief hiss, immediately followed by the familiar cadence. Drip, drip, drip. It felt pointed, admonitory. A knot formed in his gut. He downed the cloying liquid quickly, the pleasure curdled by apprehension, setting the bottle down with a click. His eyes scanned the surfaces, searching for the source, the leak, the rational explanation. Nothing. Only dryness and the lingering echo of the sound. That night, seeking oblivion, he retreated to bed early, but sleep snagged him only to plunge him back into the well's suffocating embrace, sinking endlessly into a darkness without floor or horizon. A silent scream clawed at his throat. The voice resonated again, a hollow echo in the void, demanding the ring's restitution. He woke trembling, chest constricted, the clock beside the bed glowing 3 Saturdays a.m. A raw thirst burned in his throat. The passage to the kitchen was an abyss, his footsteps unnervingly loud on the old floorboards. He flipped the switch, bathing the room in sterile light, and approached the sink. As his hand closed around the faucet handle, an intense prickling sensation crawled up his spine, the unmistakable feeling of being observed. He whirled around. Empty room. Gooseflesh pebbled his arms, his heart slugged against his ribs. The tap sputtered, then yielded a stream of water. He filled a glass, drank greedily, the water feeling unnaturally heavy, viscous. Wiping his mouth, he twisted the faucet closed. Instantly, the dripping resumed, louder, sharper, seemingly originating directly beneath the basin. He flung open the cabinet doors. Dry pipes, dust, darkness. No leak. The sound persisted for several seconds, mocking his search, then ceased abruptly, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator. In the days that unspooled, the dripping became his shadow, a soft, insistent metronome, marking time in the living room as the television droned, an echo in the cavernous garage while he searched for tools, a faint counterpoint to the rattle of mail falling into the box at the end of the drive. Never loud, never frantic, just present. A persistent, misplaced punctuation in the grammar of his life. He maintained a facade of normalcy. The commute, the sterile office tasks, even a strained coffee meeting with a colleague where every sip felt scrutinized. Water became suspect. He found himself rationing it, avoiding the simple ritual of washing his hands unless absolutely necessary, using paper towels to mop the constant sheen of nervous sweat from his brow. His skin grew tacky, unclean, a state preferable to the chilling intimacy of running water, the feeling of unseen eyes that accompanied it. The ring lay exiled in a cheap cardboard box within his nightstand drawer. He tried to ignore its presence, but whenever the drawer slid open, the dark stone seemed to capture the ambient light, drawing his gaze. Tentatively, he'd touched it, considered disposal, burying it deep, casting it into the river. But the crystal remained unnaturally cold against his skin, even in the house's warmth, sometimes emitting a barely perceptible thrum that resonated up his arm, stirring to faint nausea. And sometimes, unbidden, the voice would surface in his thoughts, a low insistence. Return it. Cold sweat would bead on his forehead. He fought the rising panic by immersing himself in tangible tasks, mending fence palings, spackling hairline cracks in the plaster, desperate anchors in a reality threatening to dissolve. One evening, propelled by a desperate need for confrontation or closure, Elias forced himself back to the well. He chose the liminal hour just before sunset, hoping the fading gold light might offer some frail shield against the dark. Tendrils of vine had already begun their patient reclamation of the iron lid. Grunting with effort, he dragged it aside, the shriek of metal on stone setting his teeth on edge. He knelt, aiming his torch into the shaft. The familiar dampness clung to the bricks. A surge of frigid air breathed upwards, chilling his face despite the still evening. The torch beam plunged into absolute black, revealing no glint of water, no discernible bottom. His pulse leaped, breath hitched in his chest. He remained crouched, straining to hear over the frantic thudding in his ears. A faint, echoing drip ascended from the depths. His mouth was dust, his palms slick. He tightened his grip on the torch. Then, the voice. Not the internal whisper this time, but a resonant groan emanating from the well itself. A sound of ancient, abyssal mourning. Startled, his hand spasmed. The torch slipped, tumbling down, its beam pinwheeling wildly, before striking the unseen depths with a distant clatter. The light extinguished or swallowed. He scrambled backwards, legs weak, heart battering his ribs. He kicked the heavy lid frantically back into place, tearing skin from his knuckles on the rough concrete surround. He didn't spare a thought for the lost torch. The idea of reaching into that darkness again was unthinkable. That night found Elias marooned on his sofa, every lamp in the house blazing against the encroaching shadows. Nausea churned within him. The insidious drip seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of the walls. Returning the ring, the thought circled endlessly. But how? Simply toss it back into that abyss. Would that appease the presence, or further provoke it? The voice in his nightmares insisted on return, but offered no instruction. He pictured leaning over the edge, an unseen hand lashing out from the dark to seize his own. Sweat slicked his forehead. His jaw ached from clenching. His shoulders were rigid with tension. His eyes darted around the room, half expecting to see dark stains spreading on the ceiling, puddles forming on the floor. But there was only oppressive dryness and the relentless drip, drip, drip scoring itself onto his sanity. Sleep was fragmented, each surrender punctuated by visions of the well, the echo of the voice, jolting him awake, gasping, pillow damp beneath his head. Morning found him hollow-eyed, depleted. In the kitchen, he forced himself to the sink, needing to rinse a mug. His hand trembled as he turned the tap. Water gushed, and the familiar prickle of unseen scrutiny returned. Less intense, perhaps, but undeniable. He worked quickly, shutting off the flow almost immediately. Enough. This slow erosion could not continue. He retrieved the ring from its box. It felt impossibly cold, like a shard of frozen night. He pocketed its chill weight and walked deliberately into the yard, towards the stone circle. Standing beside it, he listened. The air hung heavy, expectant. Bile rose in his throat. Steeling himself, he grasped the chain, wrenched the lid aside with a final, ear-splitting scrape. He knelt at the precipice, the void yawning beneath him. He drew the ring from his pocket. His heart hammered, a frantic drum against his ribs, a pulse in his throat. Darkness waited. He held the ring out over the opening, his breath catching. The command resonated, seeming to originate from within his own skull. Return it. His fingers, slick with sweat, trembled violently. The ring slipped, a tiny dark object falling, swallowed instantly by the black. For a suspended moment, Elias remained frozen, listening into the earth's silence. Nothing. Then, from the depths, a single, resonant plink echoed upwards. A profound weakness washed through his limbs. He shoved the heavy lid back into place, securing it as tightly as the rusted chain allowed. His muscles screamed with tension as he trudged back towards the house, refusing to look back. Inside, he stood at the kitchen sink, a small act of defiance. He let the water run, washing his hands, deliberately slowly, waiting for the familiar prickle of observation. It was there, yes, but muted now, a ghost of its former intensity. He turned off the tap, listened. The phantom dripping was softer, less insistent, robbed of its immediate menace. A palpable weight seemed to have lifted from his shoulders, though the underlying disquiet remained. He doesn't know if the act truly appeased whatever slumbered beneath the soil, if the transaction is complete. Sleep comes more readily now. The nightmares faded to unsettling impressions rather than visceral terrors. The phantom weeping of water still whispers occasionally from within the walls, a faint, intermittent reminder, but it no longer sends his heart into frantic revolt. The subterranean voice remains silent. He finds himself watching the backyard, his gaze drawn involuntarily to that circle of stone. He listens for the scrape of iron, watches for any disturbance. Vigilance has become instinct. The memory of the ring's glacial touch, the way water itself seemed complicit, is indelible. Every unexpected gurgle in the pipes, every stray drip from a gutter, makes him pause, listen, assess. Whether the well is truly dormant or merely patient, he cannot say. But he can stand at his sink now, can feel the flow of water over his skin, without the immediate certainty of something cold and unseen breathing down his neck. For now, in this house of uneasy echoes, that fragile truce suffices.